Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask Dr. Shana. What are we going to talk about today?
Last week, I asked my listeners if they would be so kind as to tell me a subject they wanted to hear about, since I had already done 2 episodes on how to avoid depression in hard times and 2 episodes on how to control anxiety. And because I've decided, listening to the radio about how many people are losing their homes or have no money to buy food or so forth and so on, I think perhaps talking about the prevention of suicide. I am a person who has attempted suicide with very close calls 4 times when I was a young person. And I will say that after the 4th time, and I have brain damage that I was born with, and coming back to consciousness with the same situation, all the brain damage and problems I was born with, but then nothing additional. I decided that I had put in a request to be sent somewhere beyond Earth 4 times, very seriously, and I had miraculous or nearly miraculous rescues 4 times. So I perhaps have a particular view because many people don't last to make 4 serious attempts. And a person who cuts their tries to cut their arteries is not a person who jumps off a tall building. We don't know why exactly, but that's the truth of the matter. So, and if a person is absolutely determined to make themselves dead quickly, they're almost unstoppable, because several prisoners in Vietnam killed themselves by simply bending over and running into a wall. And if they ran into the wall fast enough so that they hit their head pretty hard quickly, they would bleed inside the head and end up dead. So if a person is absolutely determined, there's no way they can be stopped. They'll think of something.
And right now, guns are very, very prevalent in the United States. So it is quite possible and easy for those who decide to take that route that they will be successful.
Yes. And there are laws that a person who is mentally unbalanced can be prevented from having a gun. But the thing is, very rarely does anybody invoke one of those laws.
Yes.
They're not enforced. But if someone has a family member who has committed suicide, whether by drug overdose or by gunshot or by whatever, that the family member who has survived should not feel guilty that their brother or aunt or whoever committed suicide, because, as I say, if a person is determined, they are determined. And it is ultimately the responsibility of the patient who attempts suicide if they do die. So I don't want to have a whole lot of people who have experienced a suicide in the family feeling that they should have done something or they were responsible. No. Um, Now, as to the person themselves, two big categories, if you like, of reasons for suicide are: number one, that the person doesn't feel anybody cares about them. This may not be true. For instance, for my mother, it was almost impossible to face the idea that I had attempted suicide, because in her culture, suicide is not something that is spoken of, or it is not mentionable. And if the person survives, as I did, you just say, "Hello, how are you doing today? I brought you a book that might be of interest," whatever. You go on with pleasant conversation, and they just don't even pronounce the word suicide. So, and you have to deal with the fact that people have grown up wherever and with whomever, and it may not be possible for them to face the idea, really. But on the other hand, I can say that if you have a family member who is not very sure of themselves and really wobbly, and let's say that you are still in a state where you are commanded to keep to social distancing, and you cannot actually get in the same room with them and hug them, none of us can do that, you can nevertheless call them fairly frequently, say a couple times a week, and try to give them a hug over the phone. If you're able to say, "I care about you," or "I love you," or "I need you to stay with us," do that, because the person who's thinking of suicide may not be able to say that they're suicidal, or to, but they will remember if you say, "Now look, brother, I really care about you. You've always been my older brother, and you've always been helpful to me, and I don't want you to disappear suddenly. I love you," if you can say that. And if you feel you need to write it down because you'll get tongue-tied when you're on the phone, write it down and then read it. I
Good
mean,
idea.
do whatever you have to do to get to where you can transmit your message unequivocally. I mean,
No, this is a great idea.
Saying, well, I've always been fond of you and I'm used to having you around, that doesn't cut it. It has to be, I care about you. I want you. I need you in my life. Um, and make an appointment. If today, as it is Friday, say, I'll call you back on Monday in the evening, or why don't you call me? But the thing about you, why don't you call me, is that if you have 3 minutes and you're in the bathroom and that's when they call, you didn't answer. So maybe it's best if you're in charge of the call. And I've always looked up to you. I love you. I need you.
These are wonderful ideas. Very, very helpful. I,
Um,
I have a
so
I have a question. Um, as a doctor of public health, do you expect the number of suicide attempts to go up now? Is that a real issue?
I think there may be some people who attempt suicide if, for example, they have spent their entire lives building up a small business and their business has just gone bankrupt and they have no business. And this was their endeavor since they were 20 years old. Um, it's pretty hard to take. And especially if the family's attention has gone to grandma who just died of coronavirus, who's 95 years old, and the person that I'm thinking of is maybe 45, and he doesn't even get any sympathy or empathy, or my goodness, you spent 25 years from the age of 20 to the present working up your business. You had a nice little business. You were thinking of establishing a second location, and it's all gone down the tubes. And you are you're a married man with 3 children, and as a provider, you feel like a failure. Um, and that's the second reason, beyond feeling nobody cares about you, for attempting suicide, is the feeling that you have been humiliated. You are a failure. There's nothing you can do. As for many people, there's nothing they can do right now, uh, because people can get loans for paying the rent or whatever, but they don't get business loans for restarting a business, especially if you have to explain to the bank that I had a business which was comfortably profitable, but it disappeared because we were commanded to shut down. Um, and the feeling that it's your failure. Now, it isn't your failure. It's the coronavirus intruding in all our lives. And for instance, I asked my helper to take off the beautiful picture of me, because I haven't been able to be to my hairdresser for a couple of months, I think. And that makes me feel bad. But then I realize, okay, so I don't have a beautiful hairdo. So, so what? It's more important to talk to people about how to prevent suicide. And if you can get other people in the family to realize that what did you in as a business owner was the mandated closure of your business. And this is not a very good time to go to a bank to get a loan to start a business. And especially when they say, well, what happened to the business you had before? So you need to feel that your self-esteem as a person is not absolutely tied to the success of your small business. It has to do with people's respect for your approach to problems, your kindness, your willingness to be helpful, lots of other things that have nothing to do with you have to be successful in your business or else you're all washed up.
I see.
Um,
I have one last question. Um, is there anything, if, for instance, if I was feeling suicidal and feeling like I was a failure, is there anything that I could do? I know reach out, but sometimes reach out to family members, but I don't feel like it because I feel like a failure. Is there anything that a person could do who is actually contemplating suicide to help themselves?
um, well, I'd say this is a national crisis and no fair taking your own life in the middle of a national crisis because, you know, you're leaving everybody else, including your wife and your 3 small children, to pick up the pieces without you. And they need you just as much as you need them. If
So
it is
thinking about
possible to
others.
say to your wife, you know, since the business went belly up, I feel like such a failure. And say it in a let your neediness come out. Um, but it's a national crisis. I mean, imagine somebody who's standing near the top of a tall building and the building explodes. Don't you think that a person who's there should see if they could run down the back stairs before they crumble, rather than jump off the top of the building and commit suicide? Your children need you. It will mark them for the rest of their lives if they said, my father committed suicide when I was 6.
So so thinking about others is a good thing to do. Putting others before yourself.
Yes, and thinking about others and recognizing that, for instance, small children have needs that the grown-ups are supposed to supply. So if you're feeling nobody cares about you, go get one of your small children and say, I want to tell you a story, and tell them a story about whatever. And say, did you like that? And see if you can get a laugh out of them, or see if they can feel less anxiety about this coronavirus business thanks to you. And because of your telling them a story, and even though they say be 6 feet apart, small children don't seem to get coronavirus anyway. So let them, sit next to you and put an arm around them. Because small children, it's very strange. Many respiratory illnesses affect the very young and the very old. But this one, the coronavirus, doesn't seem to kill little kids. That's why one of the first places to open up in Europe is primary schools in Denmark, because that would give their parents the possibility of getting ready, of going back to work. And it doesn't seem to hurt the kids. But committing suicide when the kids are small, or even when they're older, it marks them for life. And it has been shown that the children of people who committed suicide when the child was young are about 10 times more likely to commit suicide later on themselves, because they have learned it as a way of solving a problem.
This is so interesting. This is I can't tell you how meaningful this is. I think it's just going to be great for so many people.
But and I would say to the kids, appreciate your parents. Probably if you sat next to your father and he told you a story and you finished and you said, I love you, Daddy, that will keep him from attempting suicide for several days, because you, at age 6, said you loved him. And a 6-year-old is taken for pretty much, is trusted to mean what they say. And if you have somebody who lives on the other side of town, talk to them several times a day, and maybe if you know a recipe of theirs, well, ask them exactly how do they do the part, of putting the ingredients together or something. Even if you do know, because that'll make them feel needed.
What would you tell someone right now who may have been contemplating suicide? What message would you like to give them?
That there may be wonderful things just around the corner for them, but if they jump off the world of the living by committing suicide, they'll never find out what they were. I'm always surprised in my life, because I never know what's around the next corner, almost literally.
And you've had an amazing life.
Well, I mean, the man who you just heard speak, who is helping me make these videos, was somebody I met because my sister came to me one day and said that she was just told by a mechanic that her used car, which was a 2005 or something, could blow up at any minute. And I said, oh my, we've got to get you into a safer car. So we went car hunting, and the person whose car we bought was the man who had just spoke a minute ago. And and the marketers of I have written 2 books, one called Taming the Dragon, which is all about how to cope with mental illness, and the other called My Money's on the Turtle, which we're going to republish under the title Desire for Change. Anyway, this man who sold us the car, the marketers for the 2 books had said that I had done enough episodes, and they had enough for their purposes of publicizing the books, and so they dropped the show. And I had the great good fortune that Mr. Barker was somebody who could help me out and tape the show for me and post it, because I didn't want to give up my show. I felt I had something like 700 viewers on a regular basis, and it was growing every episode. It was a little more. And I really didn't want to just vanish as far as these people were concerned. So, but if somebody had said to me, well, your sister is going to come and complain she needs a better car, and you're going to find a better car with Mr. Barker, and he's going to be able to pick up your YouTube show, I will have said, sure, that's very likely. You know, that looks entirely probable. How many people are there in Rochester, the city I live in, Rochester, New York, who actually know how to videotape something and how to post it on YouTube and so on? And what's my like? I wasn't thinking of that at all. I was completely taken aback when that happened. But my life has been full of things like that.
I think that there was a little bit of the hand of divine providence involved.
Yes, I think so too, because I'm sure there were quite a number of people wanting to sell a used car, and it was my sister who said we have to go to Mr. Barker's place, and I had no idea. I thought we might get a car out of it, but I didn't connect with my books or my YouTube show or anything. And I think there is a lot of the hand of divine providence in a lot of things. And it makes us feel a little uncomfortable that infinity would be bothered with us So we don't want to thank the Lord very upfront, unlike me, where I thank God all the time.
I think that is a great idea for another webinar, talking about the divine hand of providence in your life and the importance of it. I think that's wonderful. Is there anything else about suicide that you want to talk about, that we need to say?
Well, the other thing that you can realize is to tell the person whom you think may be sinking into greater and greater depression, to tell them how much they are needed, how much they are loved, how much you count on them, and how lost you would feel if they disappeared. And also ask them, we all have to be alone a lot recently. Is there anything that I could do for you that would improve your life or would improve your lifestyle? Other than, I said, I'll call you twice a week. I think twice a week is reasonable because it's something that a person who is busy can still accommodate. But at the same time, you're not saying, I call you sometime, and you mean maybe, 6 weeks later. Well, that's too far apart. If this person is really important to you, then make that evident to them.
Excellent.
Make them a birthday cake and keep a piece for yourself and say, now, you have the rest of the birthday cake, but there's no reason why we couldn't eat it while we see each other. We could be eating the same cake at the same time, and you could feel the love that went into making it. And really, I think the most important thing for anybody is to feel needed by someone.
Yes. Yes.
So that they say to themselves, well, I can't, commit suicide because, my 3 little kids would be devastated and they would be marked for life. And it might be the beginning of mental illness for them because it's not natural to kill yourself. You're supposed, as a human creature, to want to continue as long as you reasonably can. If you are talking to a family member that you think is a little bit wobbly, go ahead and ask them, have you thought of taking your own life? And then say, please don't. I would be devastated. I would be heartbroken. I could never get over the loss of you to suicide. And really, don't be afraid to say that you really care about them, that you really need them, and that they're an important part of your life. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good week. Goodbye, everybody, Until next week.